Billings. I was the editorial director for us. I founded Millet Publishing actually in 1995, and we have always been committed to publishing Turkish literature and translation. Recently we've been able to do more, and I was the editorial director of this series. So firstly though, I want to thank my hosts, the Yunus Cultural Center. I'm incredibly grateful, and I want to thank in particular Hamdi Bey, Mehmet Bey, Mevlut, my dear Mevlut. I've known him for so many years. He's always been committed to Turkish literature and translation with great support. So really major thanks to Mevlut. Also from Yunus Emre, I want to thank Tanner and Nilüfer and Nur and Elver. You guys have been great. Thank you so much. And also everybody at the stand. So thanks for the great welcome here and for giving me the space to talk about Turkish literature in English, my passion. And already when having individual conversations with you, I can see you're all passionate about literature. I know that's a Turkish thing, but it was really wonderful to kind of hear everybody's interest in this. So to get started, I'm going to talk about recent developments. And the first thing to say about recent developments in translated Turkish literature to English is TEDA, the Turkish Ministry of Culture and Tourism Translation and Publication Program, which has been absolutely critical to Millet and other publishers in getting works translated and out in English. And I think we're all enormously grateful. In the past few years, Millet did 12 books, and that is a lot more Turkish literature translated to English out in the world as a result of TEDA. And I'll talk about a little later, we're really hoping for continued support because that kind of support makes it possible for publishers to take what is a little bit of a risk, because translated literature, especially from underrepresented literatures like Turkish, is a little bit more difficult to sell in the market. There's nothing fair about that. That's wrong, that it should be that way, and we're trying to correct it. But having a commitment and support of the TEDA program is critical. The other thing I will refer to later is that the next step would be getting some support for marketing the books. We're super excited to have the books translated, published, but we want more readers. And in a really difficult economy, capturing readers of anything is difficult, and capturing readers of a niche market like translated literature is also difficult, but we also want to go beyond that and capture a general market, right? People who would have never thought about reading a Turkish author before. I'll get more back to that later. But just to talk a little bit about the series that Millet worked on, that I was the editorial director of, you can see everybody has a postcard on your seat, or it was, the 12 titles in the series. And there's some samples up here if you want to have a look afterwards. The beautiful thing about this series is that it is so diverse. There are so many different styles of Turkish writing represented. There's traditional narrative, there's postmodern works in Aeolian Visions, which is a collection. This has like poetry, it's got all sorts of experimental works. We have authors coming from so many different places in Turkey. I think we're all in the West we're very accustomed to reading writers from Istanbul writing about Istanbul, and we love Istanbul, but we also want to read about other places, like what else is there in Turkey? So we learned something else. As the Red Carnation fades is set in Trabzon, right? So we get the environment of Trabzon, the Karadeniz region, we get to feel the sense of place there. We go out of Istanbul, we go out of the city, we see some different places. This book isn't even set in Turkey. It's about the U.S. rendition program, right? It goes to Washington, D.C., it goes to Pakistan, so there's a Turkish writer. You get some glimpses of Turkey, but you know, we get outside of our usual place that we're in when we read the Turkish authors that normally get translated to English. Some of the short stories are set in the east of Turkey and Diyarbakir, places like that. So I'm really proud that the collection is more representative of the geography of Turkey and also the different identities coming from the different regions. So that was a big plus. The other thing to say is that we have a lot of women writers featured in the series, including 2 short story collections. I don't have samples here, but you can see them in the postcard. There's Istanbul in women's short stories, and Europe in women's short stories from Turkey. So there's a really great focus on women writers coming from different backgrounds and different voices. I think those 2 books are proving, in fact, the easier ones to market, because people who have a specific interest in women writing from anywhere, or women writing from the Middle East or from Europe, want to read about, what Turkish women are thinking, what they're writing, their literary styles, not just their lives, but how they write. So that's a big plus. The other thing to say about the books is what makes them be, outside of the actual writers, is the translators. There are many different translators represented here, and we would not be able to communicate Turkish literature to English audiences if it weren't for these amazing translators. A lot of them come out of the Cunda International Workshop for Translators of Turkish Literature, which takes place every summer on the island of Cunda. And the translators from the sort of established translators to the new ones, they get together and they thrash out translations, ideas, and they basically innovate, form, they push the boundaries of translation. And Cunda is also supported by TEDx and by Literature Across Frontiers, another organization that's really important. And so the product of the Cunda workshops is Aeolian Visions here, which we published a little over a year ago. And this is a collection of over 72 works of Turkish poetry and short fiction, including some traditional works, some very experimental works. There's over 40 translators represented here. These are just the ones that show up at Cunda. There are translators of Turkish to English out there, and we want to get them all jobs. We want to get them, working on, continuing to work on different, translations and getting their work out there. The Cunda workshop is absolutely a wonderful laboratory for translation, just as an art form, but obviously critically for Turkish literature. So that's hugely important to what we're doing. One thing I do want to say too about the kind of diversity of titles we have, and I had a conversation or 2 separately. One of the things that I think has kind of plagued Turkish literature in translation to English is the Orientalism, right, of English reading audiences, is that there's this desire to read about Turkey's East, to read just about Ottomans or, themes that are configured or considered as Oriental. But of course that's based on a Western imagination, a Western notion, and it's not fair. And it doesn't represent Turkey. Certainly Ottoman history is fascinating. Emre is writing a PhD dissertation about it. We want to know about the Ottomans, but we just want to know about Turkish lives, normal Turkish lives lived in non-Oriental ways. I think this is something that the series really, what we strived for as well. There are books, there's one book, Kind-Hearted Sinners. We don't even know it's set in Turkey. It's a love story. It's one lover writing to another. Nothing about Turkey shows up. The fact that it's a Turkish writer, you would never know, right? It's just a brilliant book by a brilliant writer, right? There might be certain turns of phrase that get expressed in English that you might be able to reference as coming from Turkish language if you knew Turkish, but if you didn't, it's just beautiful writing. So what I'm about as an editor of Turkish literature and as an advocate for Turkish literature and translation is to say, there's more to Turkey than history, right? Or politics. I mean, certainly that's critical. There's just literary imagination. There's quotidian, daily lives that need to be represented. So I think that we're breaking through a little bit in that respect, getting more works that give a fuller picture of Turkey, not just as a place, but as a culture that produces incredible literature. So that's another plus from that. I wanted to also talk about what other publishers are doing. I mean, obviously I want to promote the Millet series because I worked on it. But there are more books coming out. We have another wonderful translator here, Faisal Howell, who's working on several works. We've got obviously our what I call the usual suspects, the very famous Turkish writers Orhan Pamuk and Elif Shafak. They've had recent books in 2013, 2014. So they get an audience, they get published. There's some new works coming out, novels, collections of poetry by other publishers, and I think many of them are also getting ton of support. Talisman House, Art Visible Poets, Comma Press has done some. So we've got some bigger publishers publishing Orhan Pamuk and El Shafak, and everybody else is published by a smaller publisher. What I want to try to do, and what I want everybody's help in advocating for, is to change the game a little bit. Why is it that we can only have 2 famous Turkish authors at one time in English, right? There needs to be more than this. There are brilliant writers in Turkey. And I think, Orhan Pamuk and El Shafak are good, and I think they do advocate for Turkish literature, but we need to find a way in, because once we get at least 2 more authors soon on the world stage to have an influential voice, to get coverage in the New York Times and the Guardian and all of that, like in the Wall Street Journal, like, Orhan Pamuk and El Shafak. When we get coverage like that, those writers can then advocate for other Turkish writers. They can say, you think I'm great? You've got to read X, Y, and Z writers, right? Because we need people in high positions who have this sort of, influence with publishers, influence in the book market, right? I mean, I'm happy, I love working for a small publisher, but I also want Turkish authors to be published by these big giants like Penguin and so forth. So how are we going to get some more Turkish authors raised onto the world stage, the world spotlight? We know there's brilliant literature. There's no question about the quality of the literature, not at all, and the quality of the translations. What we need is marketing. And I know it's like boring to talk about the book trade, except for when you're at the London Book Fair and it's about the book trade, right? Because we're creative people, we're literature people, but we also have to sell books, right? I have to sell books. I'm working for a publishing company. If we don't sell the books, we can't, continue. Even if it's supported publishing, it still has to sell to kind of justify its existence. So one of the things that I think publishers would be looking for from TEDA, for instance, they've been so generous with the publishing and the translation, is some support for marketing and outreach, right? So these brilliant books can reach readers. How do we do that? I mean, a certain audience that we have is the academic university market. Even some of these books already have been adopted by university courses, but we have to market to academics to kind of cover that ground. There's women's studies courses. Irenda Zatisu, we published The Other Side of the Mountain by Irenda Zatisu in 2000, and that's now a standard book in women's studies courses and comparative literature courses in the United States. And that took a couple of years to build that up, but we had a lot of energy behind that marketing. So anything we can do to reach out, any kind of support we can get to reach out to the academic market, we would love. The other thing is, we also want to get to general readers. We've got niche readers who are interested, they're pre-inclined to read translated literature in general or translated literature from Turkey. We want to try to reach those readers, and marketing has costs, right? We have all these great mailing lists, our distribution companies, our sales reps. I'm going to meet with them while I'm here at the book fair. They're always saying, we're doing everything for the book, but we need you to help us. We need you to help us. We need marketing vehicles. We need ways to kind of sometimes you got to pay for things to get the bookstores to kind of cover things online, right? You have to pay Amazon to highlight a book. So these are things that I think we need to do so that we can get some more profiles raised. This is great for Turkey to get more authors known and represented. And again, my goal is not just to have a few stars, right? I want stars. But what stars can do for us is advocate for their colleagues, that the authors that they work, that they really love as well, or who are just already a hit in Turkey. Poets, right? Poetry is a hard thing to sell, but Turkish poetry is beyond world class. It's so good, right? We still need more people reading more Turkish poetry. So the act of communicating when you publish a book in translation is not the mere publication of the book, is the contact with the reader. The communication is only completed when the book is received and read by the reader, when that understanding, that entertainment they get from it, that challenge they get from it, that love they get from it, when that happens, right, then something really changes, and we can get, also open up people's eyes about Turkey more. I mean, I'm coming from the United States. I lived in Britain for a long time, but I can tell you, I'm sure you know, there's still Americans who have really outdated notions of Turkey, or no notion at all, right? Their notions have to do with some vague geopolitical identity, but nothing to do with Turkish culture, right? Or nothing to do with contemporary Turkish culture, right? So we still got a lot of, some people are interested, some people aren't, but enough are. We can get more books sold to people and read. So that's something I think that's critical. One example I was going to give in terms of this model of having more like big name authors, Turkish authors becoming big name in the West in advocating for their literature. There's a Bosnian author in the US called Alexander Heyman, and he's super popular, and he was an immigrant from Bosnia, and I mean, the Balkan countries together are kind of smaller than the might of Turkey, but every book festival he goes to, every article, and he's interviewed by all the newspapers in the US. He's like their darling. He talks about 5 or 10 other authors from the Balkans, right? He won't go to a book festival unless he's got an entourage, not in a diva way, but he's got authors coming with him from other Balkan countries. I'll come to the Penn World Voices Festival if I can bring other authors, and if you guys will think about translating them, right? Some of them have never been translated. So that's the deal that he made, right? If you want me to speak for Balkan literature, I'm not Balkan literature, I'm going to get some more voices at the table. So I would love to see more of that. I think the Turkish authors would love to do this. I don't think it's a question on their side. It's a question on getting this kind of thing coordinated and supported. So thinking about neighbors, the theme of my talk was also neighbors. That's the Balkans. Looking at Arabic literature in translation recently is also kind of instructive. There's more and more Arabic literature coming out. Saki Books here in Britain is just great, but we're getting more publishers interested. But interestingly, or not surprisingly, I should say, in the U.S., now the kind of flavor of the month is Iraqi writers, right? So the U.S. seems to be very interested in bringing to the fore Arab writers from countries in which the United States has some type of engagement, right? There's like a political interest first. And like Libya, like Hisham Attar from Libya is now popular because people were thinking a lot about Libya. Of course, his work is really worthy. I think one challenge we still find in trying to get translated literature from Turkey into the U.S. market more strongly is that unless the U.S. has a war there, right, it's hard for them to get interested. Like we had all the Afghan writers come out after Afghanistan. This is a really sad fact about the United States, but it is something that's kind of real, right? There's an Iraqi writer called Hassan Glazem, who's now being reviewed in the New York Times. He won the Independent Foreign Fiction Prize here in Britain. I think his writing is much praised, but he's much covered because he's from Iraq, and Iraq is an interesting subject. So I'm still thinking, and I'll talk to you all afterwards, continue the conversation, short of having like a negative political engagement with the United States, how do we get, the U.S. more interested in Turkish writing? So those are the kind of basic themes I wanted to cover. One thing I did want to mention, somebody had said, Jakob was talking, in terms of theme, there's this kind of debate over whether if the writing is more universal in nature and not specifically Turkish in nature, such as anything could be specifically, anything in nature. Writing is writing. Writing is the act of one person's imagination. It comes out of it. It's embedded. It comes out of a culture, but it goes out into other people's minds. Looking at themes that are sort of more universal might be an interesting thing. Most of the books we publish, even if they're not directly placed in Turkey, there is something about Turkey in the books, except for the one I mentioned. This book is an interesting example. This is has picked up a kind of niche interest in the U.S. by Salim Ilari, Boundless Solitude. It's about an opera singer who happens to be lesbian, and actually this in the United States has is being considered for an award. In American Library Association, there's a special award called the Stonewall Award. It's for literature about gay and lesbian themes. So it's really interesting that they picked up on this book. It's a book from Turkey, but this is just a very general award in the United States. So this is about a very specific theme, interestingly, just happens to be set in Turkey, but is getting quite a lot of interest based on that. So there's kind of different ways into the market, different kind of focuses we can play on. But we've got a lot more literature to work with now, thanks to getting the publications out with Tada. The next step is just, how do we promote? So I think I'll leave it at that for now and just ask any questions. There were conversations started with several of you before that if you want to bring it in, let's bring it in. Oh my goodness, I'm seeing so many people. So yeah, I know Tara had some ideas. So any questions or comments on what I was bringing up?
I'd like to mention something.
Sure.
You certainly was all great then about serious literature. Adult literature. Not enough online when you spoke about children.
Children's literature. Right.
That's a big section of research as well. And there's very little done in terms of promoting children's publishing outside that subject.
Right.
And I think there does need to be more done.
Right.
Turkish children's writers,
right.
illustrators,
right.
And a lot of you on the Turkish standard world, you were visited by many illustrators from around the world, no Turkish illustrators.
Right.
And I think that's a very
poorly represented. Right.
Turkish illustrators are extremely good. They're on a par with the Spanish illustrators or the Italians or the Japanese.
Right.
They're on a par. They're not represented in it.
No, that's a good point. So for anybody who didn't hear it in the front, so the questioner, he's working for a Turkish publishing company, and he's talking about the lack of children's literature translated from Turkish to English. And I can certainly address that. I founded Millet Publishing, which publishes these books with Sedat Turhan, and who's Turkish, and primarily we're publishers of children's books, bilingual books in English to Turkish and many different languages. We did some, and we work with Fatih Erdogan, who's like the king of Fatih's wonderful children's book writer in Turkey. Fatih's our translator. He always translates to Turkish for us. Actually, I will say something about Fatih Erdogan, who's just amazing. Most of the writers of the English children's books that we did, when we would, the Turkish translations would come in from Fatih, and Sedat and I would read them, because I read some Turkish. Certainly I could understand children's literature. Our jaws would be on the ground. I mean, his writing is so brilliant. It was sometimes intimidating for the English authors. They'd say, is the Turkish better than the English? And sometimes we would have to lie and say, oh no, but it was like, yes! I mean, Fatih's Turkish is so beautiful. His book should be, so we had Fatih's contribution to our book. So in some ways he kind of has quite a lot of children's literature in the children's book market in Britain and in the US via Millet's bilingual books. But we were sometimes approached to translate books from Turkish to English, and I think at the time that we were looking, we weren't sure about where the space was. I don't know if the space was in the market. We were originating our own titles in English, then translating in Turkish. It could have been the position we were in. But I agree with you that Turkish children's literature needs to be better represented, and I know all the publishers are having all the necessary meetings. I just think we were, and one of our translators from French to English, she's an award-winning translator, Sarah Arzoni is in the back here, and she's absolutely wonderful translator of children's literature and adults from French to English, and Sarah's worked with us and she knows how it goes. When we were, Millet was one of the first to publish, our company was one of the first to publish a French children's book in English that was very sort of artistically ambitious. And we met a lot of hostility. This was in 1999. And the first year we didn't sell a book. We were still, Sadat and I, we didn't have distribution or a sales company. We were so small. We were running the business out of our front bedroom of our flat. We still walked the streets, went into the Waterstones and all the bookstores and sold them. And people said, that book is too French. Oh, our English children, they won't read this. And we said, what? What is so too French about this book? Slowly, the book started to sell, right? And literally they would say this to our face, like, oh, this is just, like, yeah, right. So imagine us bringing in, so we met that resistance so hard, it was crazy. The book eventually was picked up by the Tate Modern Bookstore, right? And it sold like crazy there. So we ended up reprinting that book for years. It launched his career in English. That author and illustrator, Emre, is now like a New York Times bestseller, right? And he's published by Biden, one of the big art publishers. He's just has a huge career. But the first one that we did, we were not in a financial position to take the risk as a small publisher with no money, but we did. And we just faced down that resistance. We said, we are going to sell you translated French books, right? And for the bilingual books, we are going to sell you books in English, Turkish. We are going to sell you books in English, Bengali, all of that. So I think it takes a lot of pressure and work, and you have to be able to afford to do that. I mean, the smaller children's publishers, I think some of it, their resistance may be financial in kind of origin. I don't think that's always a good excuse, but it's a realistic excuse. We were crazy, we took financial risks, and we did whatever we wanted because we believed in it. It was an ideological project, more translated books, more books from other cultures, that kind of thing. But I appreciate that not everybody can do that. With the bigger companies, you think they have more money, but they have boards, they're responsible for for the books selling. They have to prove that the books sell. So the resistance is I think a mixture of ideology, economic facts, right? And I don't know. I'd have to look at the current state of Turkish children's books too to see what's coming out now. But I think Sadat, who I work with, was looking in the day. He wasn't sure that there was anything he really wanted to publish in the British market. But we were definitely working with Turkish translators and so on. So, any other topics or questions? Unless anybody else has a question, I can close it there. So, final message though I'm thanking everybody everybody I've talked to here who's really advocating for Turkish literature and especially Teda, to kind of keep it up. Let's keep doing this. I feel like we're still babies, right? We're still learning how to raise the profile of more Turkish authors and just do the kind of marketing we need so that everybody can see these books and we can reach beyond a small audience. All right, thank you.